We always make sweet, so how about something dry?
Today we make a dry traditional mead.
And we're going to be using a honey that was gifted to us by Beverly, who happens to be a big friend of the channel. She gave us like 3 of these big jars of honey and one of her kombuchas, and that is what got us making kombucha in the first place. Now, Beverly has this really cool thing on her label. She says, no heat, no filtering, treatment-free, holistic beekeeping practices to keep the bees and you healthy. Now, that's really important. She takes care of her bees like to the ultimate level, and her honey is probably of a much higher quality than what you can buy in most stores and things like that. So that's why we wanted to try it. I mean, why not? And the recipe we're doing today is going to highlight the honey. It's all about the honey. If you've ever seen our My First Mead, this is going to seem pretty similar to you with a couple of different exceptions. But let's get started. What we want to do is get a gallon fermenter, and I'm going to put that on my scale. I'm going to tear it out. Now, we did not heat the honey first, so this is going to be a little bit more difficult to pour than usual. It's going to be very thick, and it's going to coat the inside of the funnel. But this water is slightly warm, feels maybe a little bit warmer than body temperature, so it'll take care of that. But
so as Brian focuses... Oh, we need to tear it out again.
Yeah.
Make sure to tear it out when you put your funnel in there.
Yeah.
As Brian focuses on that, I'm actually going to stand up and focus on the level in our funnel because it's not going to run as quickly as we may anticipate.
Smell that.
Oh, that's good honey.
This is really rich, really amazing honey. Should we make a brew with this or should we just eat this? I really can't eat it, so we have to make a brew with it. Anyway, I am going to be using 2.5 pounds, and that's a little less than we normally use. And there's a good reason for that. Because of the yeast we're using, this puts it just below the tolerance level of that yeast, so therefore it will go dry, which that's the idea. All right, the moment of truth. Can you?
You want it tilted?
Yeah, tilt that slightly for me. Whoa, thick. Super thick.
I am watching.
Now she's watching because it can overfill really easily. Just want to get to the 2.5 pound mark. I'm at about 1.5 now. I'm filling up this funnel really quick. All right, so now we give this about 5 minutes to go through the funnel. Okay, while that goes into the fermenter, I'll give you a couple other of the ingredients that are going to go in this. But before we do that, let's take a closer look at that honey, shall we? Okay, back to those other ingredients. 2 things. We are going to be using black tea. Now, it's important to use black tea, not herbal tea, not green tea, not purple tea, yellow tea, peach tea, whatever. Just use black tea. It's not there for flavor. You won't taste tea in this at all. Trust me, you won't taste the tea at all. So even if you don't like black tea, just use it. It's there for something called mouthfeel. It adds tannins, because tea has tannins in it, and it gives that little bit of a pucker. It rounds out the flavors, because mead can be a little bit overly sweet if you don't do this. Even though this is going to be dry, it could still be a little flat and boring. So by adding a little bit of mouthfeel, we make it more interesting. The other thing I'm adding is orange peel. Now, if you don't have the type of orange peel that I have, it's okay. You can use fresh. We are actually using dried orange peel. How did I get dried orange peel, you might ask? Good question. I peeled some oranges, shredded them into little tiny pieces, and put it in a dehydrator. Actually, I think I used an oven because I don't think we had a dehydrator yet. That just shows you how long we've had this stuff. And I let it go until it was pretty dry. Not like ash dry, but dry. And that's it. And I'm going to use a couple of pinches of this. If you don't have this, a couple of nice, good swaths. Yeah, I just like that word. Swaths of orange peel is good. Or if you want to use a zester, just use like maybe 1/4 to 1/2 of an orange. It's not really there for flavor so much as it adds a little acidity. It adds a little extra balance to the flavors of this mead. Okay, since our honey is just about there, I'm going to add in the tea, which has been steeping for about 5 minutes. And it is just a regular black tea, nothing fancy. I mean, this one is actually kind of fancy. It's a Assam tea. It's actually really nice tea.
It was gifted to us by one of our moderators.
It was Adam, I think.
Yep.
Now, as I'm pouring it in, I'm making sure to spread it all over the place so that it gets most of that honey off the funnel. And you're probably hearing all kinds of weird noises because the microphone is literally 3 inches away. Tea in. Okay, so I'm going to take this off of here because we no longer need the scale. It has done its duty. It is finished.
And some people might get a little perplexed with us because they have in the past about exact volumes of water. And we'll get to that in a moment.
So to get the orange in there, really, really simple. Don't even need a funnel. Just going to grab a couple of pinches and feed them through. Nothing fancy. Brewing, simplest hobby ever. You just have to have some patience, really. 3 pinches. That's probably the equivalent of like a quarter to almost half an orange, okay? So don't overdo it or you will have an orange mead, which isn't a bad thing, but it won't be the same as this. So if you're using fresh, like I say, quarter to a half. Now water. We've had a few people ask this. How much water did you use? I used enough to fill it to a gallon, okay? So what we're gonna do today, because we have this fancy schmancy pitcher that has numbers and a graph on the side, we can actually see how much we used. So let me get my funnel back out, which has now completely dissolved any honey that was left on there. See, convenient, huh? And I'm gonna put that back on here and get all those little bits in there. Get in. I said in, not out. All right, and I'm gonna start pouring some water in. How much? Well, I'll let you know when is enough. When you get to this far, you want to stop because you want to mix this up. If you fill it all the way to the top and then try to mix it, it's going to be a pain. So don't do it that way. Okay, to mix this, there's a few ways. You can get a spoon, put it in there. You can get a drill with a thing on the end and go, if you really want to. Or just put a bung in the top and shake the bejesus out of it. That's what I do. It's really, really simple. Now, being that I put hot tea in there and I put warm water in there, that honey should dissolve really nice and easy. What you want to do is dissolve it, but we're also doing something else. What else are we doing?
Creating aeration, which is important at this stage of fermentation. The yeast require a healthy amount of air in order to really get going on the fermentation process. That's why we shake it really crazy, because you can see all that foam that's being created. That is the air being forced into the liquid.
It's also a really good arm workout. Make sure the bottle is mostly dry and your hands are dry before you start. Otherwise, it can slip and that could be bad. I have a rule of thumb when it comes to shaking and mixing. Do it as long as you think you need to. Then do it for 2 more minutes. You're probably just enough at that point. So you can go even longer if you want to. You cannot overdo this. But you notice the color difference? That's air being in there. It's totally mixed up. And I can see little bits and pieces of the orange zest floating around. But what I don't see is anything on the bottom. Now, when you're doing a sugar mixture, the trick is let it sit on the table for a minute or 2 and then look at the bottom. If you can see sugar on the bottom, it's not mixed. With honey, it's a little bit harder. You just have to make sure that there's none clinging anywhere. And it doesn't look like it. So I can remove the solid bung. Now, you don't have to use a solid bung. You can use the one with the hole in it. Just, it'll poke into your thumb. I call that my thumb saver bung because it doesn't have a hole. Now I need my funnel back. By the way, we didn't talk about this, but sanitization is very important. That is the first step. And we tend to use something called
the red bucket of sanitization,
which is basically just a red bucket with Star San liquid in it. Now, not just Star San liquid, which means the mix. So it's got a few gallons of water in there and everything gets dunked in there and soaked in there for a few minutes. That way they're sanitized. There's a difference between clean, sanitized, and sterilized. Sterilized is when it's like hospital clean, okay? We don't need to go that far. We just need to sanitize so that bugs that would normally try to infect this can't get in there or are dead. Now, I'm gonna put more water in. How much? I'll let you know. That foam is a little bit of a prevention measure for me. It means I can't go as high as I want to. It's at this point that I decide how greedy I want to be. Now, when I say that, there's a reason. If I get too greedy and I put too much, if this starts to really get active, it can foam up right up through the top and spill out all over the place, and I waste it. If I don't put in quite enough, well, that just means I didn't make enough mead. So at this point, you have some choices to make. This is when Derek always gives me the eye. Right now, we have a lot of foam in here. That foam is going to go away because it's just air bubbles, okay? They will break up and go away. But I'm only to here on my level. I'd actually like it to be a little bit higher than that. So I pour really, really slowly because that way the water going in is actually breaking up the bubbles ever so slightly. And you see I can get a little bit more water in there. I think that's about it. I might be able to get a little bit more if there was less foam, but with the foam, oh well, it is what it is.
So now, because, as we said, we are using our fancy schmancy pitcher, we can tell you exactly how much water we put in this 1 gallon US 1 gallon fermenter.
We started with 128 ounces. There are 40 ounces left. Therefore, we used 88 ounces of water.
So for those of you playing at home, that is exactly what we used in this particular vessel. But if you're using a different fermentation vessel, then its parameters may be different, requiring you to put more or less water in it to get to that sweet point on your particular vessel. That's why normally we don't tell you exactly how much water we use.
By the way, if you're doing this in, say, a 2-gallon vessel, you would just multiply everything I've done by 2. If you're doing this in a 1.4, you do it 1.4. If you're doing it in, say, a British gallon, which is 5 liters, you would multiply by a number that'll probably be here because I can't do that one in my head. I think it's like 1.25 or 1.3. So it's really easy. You just scale things up. The only thing you don't scale up is the next step, which is the yeast. Today, I chose to use Premier Classique yeast by Red Star. Now, why this yeast? Well, because it was convenient. It was the first one that I picked up, actually the second one that I picked up. But it goes to 13% alcohol, and that's on the high end of where I really want this to be. This is probably going to go to about 12%. That way, I know this will go dry on purpose. I want it to go dry. For too long, people seem to think that going dry is a bad thing because most of our meads go sweet. Well, being dry isn't a bad thing. It was just not our preference. Things change, and we wanted to try something different. Now, normally, I would use half packet of yeast to make 1 gallon. And I generally have a rule of half packet up to 3 gallons, and over 3 gallons, use a whole packet. At 3 gallons, well, do whichever way you want. But because there's not a lot of extras in here, meaning we didn't put any extra nutrients, there's no fruits, there's no anything in here, I'm going to give this the best chance I can. I'm going to give it a whole packet of yeast, as long as I can get it open. This is the only problem that I have with Red Star yeast is their packets are plastic. And you can't just tear it. 71B, I can just tear the package open. One of the things that I like about this particular yeast is that it is meant for deep, rich, complex flavors in dry wines. So it's kind of tailor-made for this exact kind of brew. Don't get me wrong, mead is still really a wine when it comes to brewing, okay? Honey might not be as nutrient-rich as grapes, but it still is a wine in the way it's made, okay? It's not a beer, and it's certainly not a hard liquor. So, it's more like a wine. So I'm going to use a whole packet. When you get to the bottom of it, give it a good thwack. Get all those little yeasties up. They like to stick to the sides. I don't know why.
Now, there is something we forgot to do, and that's okay. It just shows that we're human. Our new tactic has been, before adding the yeast, because we now dry pitch yeast, is that we would take a hydrometer reading.
Yeah, we can do that.
Which we forgot to do. So we're going to do it right now.
Can I mix it first?
Sure. We're going to mix it, and then we're going to do it right now.
Yeah, because there's all that yeast sitting on top. I'm afraid if I take a reading right this second, I'll just pick up all the yeast out of it, and it really won't help. Now, because I dry pitch the yeast, it doesn't matter if we do it before or after. It really doesn't make much difference. But a lot of people might ask, why didn't we hydrate the yeast? We used to all the time, and we found that there's almost no difference. Yeast comes pretty well active, and there's plenty of good living cells in there. We've never had a problem. It's just not a big deal. Some people say that it makes it start up faster. Most of our brews start up in an hour or two, so I can't imagine it being any faster or making that much difference coming any faster.
If you have a yeast packet that you may have forgotten about for a really long time and are not quite 100% sure they're still alive, then Pre-hydrating is a good idea because it will give you an indication of whether it's still going or not. If it starts foaming up in its little mini container, then that means, yay, they're good to go. If it doesn't, well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're dead.
Just means that you might have a little slower time getting a colony formed.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to take a hydrometer reading. For that, I use the Master Baster. This is actually sold for this purpose, by the way. It is not really just a super huge turkey baster. However, you could use it as a turkey baster, but once you do, please don't put it back in your brew. And second, I'm going to use a 100 mil graduated cylinder and a hydrometer. Hydrometer is just a density meter, okay? And it just measures the specific gravity of a liquid. What we're looking for is something in the 1075 to 1090 range. What I mean by that is 1.075 to 1.090. That is the estimated sweet spot for this particular brew. And I'm always a little hesitant to say that before I take the reading, just in case I screwed up. Now, this is where I say, well, you know, honeys vary. They do, okay? This was a totally raw, natural honey. I may not have a full gallon in here. So it's possible that that's why I'm off by 4 points. 1.094, okay? It's really not that far. It's not a big deal, but it is a little bit higher. Let me just make sure. I had a little foam there. Let me just make sure. Yeah, actually 1.092. So I was off by 2 points. I was actually shooting for a 1.088. I'll be totally honest. So I was off by 4 points. But let me take a note on that. By the way, taking notes is essential. You want to know what you did. That way, if you mess up, you don't do that again. And if you do something really good, you have a record so you can reproduce that again. Now, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to pour this right back in here. Some people don't do this. I'm not some people. You know why? Because everything here has been sanitized. It's clean. That was the silent mode. That's too funny. I don't think she's ever done that one before. Okay, so what we have now is our must. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the cap back on. These plastic caps, if you can find ones that fit your bottle perfectly, we have two different kinds of fermenters and they fit one, they don't fit the other. If you can find them, they're great. The bungs will never pop out and airlocks still go right in and hold. It's a soft enough plastic, it makes a great seal. I highly recommend them. We do have links to them in the description of this video.
We have noticed that they seem to fit better on the carboys that you purchase straight off of Amazon.
Yeah.
And they don't fit quite so well on the carboys you may find
with the free
at
apple
your
juice.
store with the free apple juice. Yes.
Now, what's the next step in this?
We're going to wait until it starts fermenting, and we're going to show you those signs once it does. So as you can tell, it is already bubbling. And if you remember the VIP, we've already shown you this because it was pretty much bubbling as soon as we put the airlock in it.
Not 5 minutes.
And we're just like, oh, that can't be a true bubbling, can it? Well,
it's been going for like close to an hour now.
Right. And if you look down further into the vessel, you can see the little bits of yeast in there, and they're doing what we call the lava lamp. And that's where they slowly churn around in the liquid. And that's another sign that something's going on, because the liquid, even though, if you remember, this was warm, isn't going to be moving around that much with that little bit of temperature change.
Right.
So because we can see the movement due to the little particles of yeast, I'm going to say...
And I was just watching the foam right here. It built up and then released. And it's doing that, which means there's gases coming out that are trying to get through that foam layer.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's totally working.
We can't see the little bit of bubbles coming up the side, but you do see kind of striations in the foam, which makes me think that it is creating new bubbles and is creating those striations in the foam layer as new layers push up the old.
So what are we going to do with this now?
I'm going to let it sit.
This is going to go for a few weeks, okay? There's been some confusion as to how long this should take and what to do. Well, I probably won't do a whole lot with it. In the first few days, I might give it a swirl. What I mean by that is just this. Just a little bit. And it breaks up some of that stuff. But see, this went backwards. Got to be careful. Sometimes when you do that, you can make a vacuum in there, and it actually will suck the pressure back in. I pulled the airlock out because it was pulling the sanitizer liquid in. That's not really a problem, but I didn't want all of it in there. The swirl. Once a day. Twice a day if you really want to. For like 3 to 5 days. A week if you really want to. Beyond that, don't do it. Let it sit.
Yeah.
Don't touch it. You don't have to do the swirl, okay? It's not absolutely a necessity. All it does is it helps keep things moving. It can help a slow fermentation a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. It probably doesn't even make a 10% difference in your brew, I'll be honest. Temperature. We keep ours between 70 and 75 degrees. Actually, it's probably closer to 72 to 76 degrees. That's Fahrenheit, by the way. Don't do that at Celsius. That would be very bad for your brew. Can you do it at higher temperature? Yeah, but it could create some off flavors. Can you do it at lower temperature? Yeah, but it'll probably be slower and has more propensity to stall. So you have to be careful. Some yeasts are more active in those ranges, and that might be a good yeast for you to use. Now, for this exact mead, do we have to use the yeast we used? No. You can use pretty much anything that has over a 12% tolerance, which is about, 95% of the yeast for wine and mead out there. Can you use bread yeast for this? Absolutely, if you want to. It might come out mildly sweet. It might go dry. Not really sure because it usually, in our case, goes to about 11.8, which this, by my calculation, should be about 12.4%. So you might get a little bit of a sweet taste if you used bread yeast for this.
We do have viewers in colder climates that have said they have little sweaters for their carboys or wrap them in blankets, and that helps keep the temperature at a more stable level.
And in warmer climates, leave it in a container of water, just like a tub with some water on it. Take a towel, soak it in water, wrap it around it. Couple times a day, change that out, wring it out, and that'll drop the temperature a bit too. So there's ways to maintain all that stuff. But the main rule about brewing is this. Time heals all brews, and mead wants to make itself. We just need to learn to stay the heck out of the way. That's really the main thing to it. Let's check on that dry mead we made, shall we? So we started this on March 25th. Today is April 13th. That is 19 days. And after 19 days, a lot has happened. But also, I'm seeing neutral pressure in that airlock, which means it might be done. That's not a guarantee. It's just a sign that it could be, or that fermentation is just really, really slowed down.
But let's take a closer investigation. So you can see there's still a bit of a bubbly foam at the top, and it's not a croissant type because it is not collecting the particles and the proteins. You can see there's a little residual protein mass right here. But these guys are making me think that fermentation might be done, might not be done.
I can see little teeny tiny bubbles coming up.
Could also just be off-gassing, but because we are seeing little tiny bubbles come up, that's normally a sign of continued fermentation. But it certainly has slowed down.
And there's quite a bit of lees at the bottom.
We got the nice lees cake at the bottom here. It's not too wispy, so I'm pretty happy with the flocculation there. And you can see our citrus peels there.
So overall, it's looking great, okay? Everything about this looks right. Now, because it started with only a 1.092 gravity, I know I say only, that's actually not that low. For us, it is. We usually make much higher ABV meads. So for us, this is a little bit on the lower side, which means it should be done faster. It'll clear out faster. It's already starting to clear slightly. You can see it's definitely not as cloudy as it once was. But let's take a reading, find out what it's doing.
Another benefit to using a lower gravity to start off with is it tends not to stress the yeast out as much.
Yeah. They have a much easier time.
Overfeeding the yeast is actually not really a good thing.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to, I want to make more alcohol. So they will add a lot more sugars or fermentables than maybe they should right from the beginning. And that just makes it, that just makes it really, really hard on your yeast. And well, if your goal was to make more alcohol, you may not make more alcohol.
Let me get the glass.
You might actually get a stalled brew instead. Is that floating? Please tell me it's floating.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think it's floating. All right, I'll just have to pour some in. The reason why we want to know is it floating is because if it's not floating, I'm not getting an accurate reading. So as soon as this hydrometer is floating in the liquid, I can get an accurate reading. And this one looks like 1.0, it's 1.000 on the nose. So this actually went dry. But is it finished completely? That's a question, and we don't have the answer yet.
And some of you may be confused, well, how can it go below 1.000? Well, that's because what this is actually measuring is the density of the liquid. So alcohol is
Like a 0.71
Yeah.
specific gravity or 0.79 specific gravity. So it's actually below 1.000, which means enough alcohol mixed with water will actually be below 1.000. So it can go there easily. Just going to pour off a tiny little sample because this is very young. We don't expect this to taste great yet. It's only 19 days old. And I'm going to pour the rest in. If you did not sanitize your hydrometer and your tube and things like that,
shame on you.
yeah. And don't pour it back in, because if those things aren't clean and sanitized, you could be pouring microbes back in. Let's put the airlock back on this. And again, our airlock is filled with either sanitizer liquid, which is basically just the stuff that's in turbos, or a cheap alcohol of your choice. I prefer Scoresby Scotch for that because I hate it. And I do. I'm going to put that back on there. And now we're all back to normal. Everything's good, right? It's sealed up, but we do want to get a little taste on this. You know, for 19 days and being dry. See, a sweeter mead, a sweeter brew covers up a lot of things. A lot of the newer sulfur smells, things like that are caused during fermentation, things that are rather unpleasant in a dry brew. Sweet brews can cover those things up. Whereas a dry brew, everything's out in the open. You kind of know. In the smell, in the taste, everything. She's smiling. That's interesting. I do get a little bit of citrus on the smell. The honey, the fermented honey is there. Wow.
For a dry mead.
Oh my God. That's actually not bad at all.
Yeah.
We're starting to make more dry stuff. A lot of people have asked, and there's various reasons why. I'm going to calculate the alcohol because I believe this is finished. We are going to wait a week and take another reading, but I believe this is finished. I just want to see what the alcohol content is right now. So to calculate our ABV, we start with our original gravity, which is 1.092, minus today's gravity, which is 1.000, and we get 0.092. Times 135, which is my coefficient of choice. Some people use 131.25. I find 135 to be more accurate when you're doing anything but like a beer. I mean, anything 7% higher, this is going to be more accurate. And I get 12.42% alcohol.
Not too shabby.
Not bad at all. That's actually pretty respectable and in the same range as what we used to make with the sweet brews all the time. And this did it in less than 19 days. This was ready probably 4 or 5 days ago. We just haven't had a chance to check on it, which is another point. There's no rush, okay? We're not racking this yet. We're not doing anything to it. We just took our first reading, and in a week, we're going to take another one. See them. So, week's gone by. Time to check it again. So a week ago when we checked this, it was at 1.000. Today it's at like 0.999. I mean, it seems to have gone down just ever so slightly, but it's done for all intents and purposes. So we are going to rack this. So for that, I'm going to need a wide mouth fermenter. Now you may be wondering why I said I need a wide mouth fermenter. It's not really because I need a wide mouth, it's because they're slightly different sizes. This is a 1.2 gallon, actually, even though it says gallon. That's about 1 full gallon in the wide mouth. So when I rack this off and I get rid of all the lees, I'm gonna have a little bit less, so I don't want too much headspace, so I know putting it in there will be just fine. And I also want to pour this directly into here, because if I pour it into the primary fermenter, well, I'm very likely to stir up all that lees and make it where racking it off of it doesn't really serve any purpose now, does it?
Almost sounds like he's talking from experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've done that a few times. So we're going to put this down here. This is our destination vessel, and we have our source right here. I'm going to take our auto siphon, and yes, you really do want to siphon this rather than pour or filter or any of those other ways of doing this. It's just cheap, efficient, practical, makes sense, and it works. That's why people have been doing it for hundreds of years.
The reason why we do it this way is because we're trying to limit the exposure to oxygen once our brew has been fermented. There's alcohol there. We don't want vinegar.
Right. Acetobacters, which is what makes vinegar, can activate in the presence of oxygen and alcohol. So, because this was a sealed container that was producing CO2, and CO2 is heavier than oxygen, up until I took that airlock off, there was no oxygen in here. It was all CO2. Now, there's probably still quite a bit of CO2 blanket, but as I'm moving things around and disturbing it, there is some oxygen going in. Some might argue that even my very talking nearby could be doing it. Sure, to some extent. However, the amount of air that's actually going to be able to get in there is so minimal. So we are racking it right now into the next vessel. We're going to put a lid on it as soon as possible, and hopefully that eliminates the amount of oxygen that could be touching it.
Besides making vinegar, we can also introduce off flavors, and we're trying to avoid that as well.
So, as predicted, because we went from a larger vessel to a smaller vessel, we are just past the shoulder, minimizing that headspace, so we should be just fine. Getting an airlock on there, so that way any degassing that happens is just going to keep that idea going. Some people will say you should degas at this point. I'm not in this case because I want to keep some of that CO2 coming out to preserve that blanket there and keep oxygen out while this conditions. You might say, how long is it going to condition for? It's hard to say, but probably a few weeks. It should clear up a little bit more. Getting it off of all this stuff, getting everything out of there should help a bit. And right now it is starting to clear already, so it's probably at that point. By the way, if you were curious about loss, that's about all we lost on this one. Not very much at all. That's like, I don't know, just a couple of fluid ounces. It's not even very much at all because we did end up with a full gallon. That's a full gallon in that jar. So this is just going to go, and what's it going to do?
It's going to sit
For a couple weeks. Let it clear out, and then we'll be back to rack it again and bottle it off. All right, so it's been 9 days, so that means we are on day 27 now of this mead. And, well, we already did 2 checks on it, and they both came out basically the same. So we haven't diluted it. We haven't added anything to it. Therefore, it's done. And now it's actually clearing out a little bit. It'll clear a little bit more in the bottle, but let's put this in the bottle. And then, in a couple days, you'll see us do a tasting.
But first, we're going to take a preliminary tasting to make sure we don't need to adjust it in any way.
Exactly. It's always good to do that just before you put it in the bottle. That way, what you put in the bottle is what you should expect. And, if you needed any sweetening or things like that, it's always a good idea. In our case, we're trying to make a dry mead, so we don't really want to add too much sweetener if it's at all avoidable, you might say. Oh, I'll try to not clank the bottle too much, too. That's a big sample. Oh, well. It's like 9 a.m. Why not, right? Okay. Usually, drier meads have more of a foot smell. And what I mean by that is if yeasts are a little bit stressed or if the mead doesn't have any sweetness to it, they tend to not taste so good. Like they have a little bit of a sulfury smell or things like that. This doesn't at all. It actually smells very clean.
It has a hint of it at the end, but forward, it's really honey in the aroma.
Keep in mind, this is 4 weeks old and bone dry. This was 0.999 for specific gravity. So this is as dry as you're going to get. But I remember when we took a sample taste once before, this was good. Wow. I taste honey. The honey character is so strong.
Yeah, it's interesting to get the honey notes without the sweetness.
Yeah. And this is this is like 13.6% alcohol. That's kind of awesome. A 12% mead, that dry, this young, tastes actually really wonderful. I would drink it as it is. Let's bottle.
So normally we would rack from this to a pitcher and then from the pitcher to the bottles. But upon closer inspection, we noticed there is practically no lease in here whatsoever. So we're going to skip that part and go directly from this to our bottles.
And today we're going to be using some 1 liter bottles that we have, swing tops. Obviously, we love swing tops. They are my favorite type of bottle to use for all of our bottling needs. However, there are some screw tops that are quite nice as well. We don't use corks, mostly because they're disposable. We want to reuse the bottles, and these things are great. You can reuse this seal over and over again for years, and then you can get cheap replacements very inexpensively.
We do have one 750 milliliter bottle amongst our 1 liters, just because that's what we had.
Because a gallon is actually 3.785 liters. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 0.750. So with the rather large tasting sample that we had, we probably have exactly 4 bottles. Watch me eat my words later on when one of them is only half full, but we're going to go with that story for now.
So, of course, we've cleaned and sanitized our bottles.
And we're going to use an auto siphon for this, just like we always do, with a bottling wand. Bottling wand has the springy thingy on the end, also known as
Stem valve.
Yeah. And all we do is just put that on the end of the tubing, just a little bit. It is the same auto siphon. Some people seem to think that you need 2 auto siphons so that one of them can have the bottling wand attached. No, that's just crazy.
You can if you want to.
There's no need.
But we don't.
Now, to do this with an auto siphon and a bottling wand, you need usually 4 hands. If you don't have 4 hands, you can just push this down with one hand and try to siphon with the other. It's a little bit complicated, but it can actually be done. And I just want to get it started, get all the air out of the system, and then that can drop to the bottom, and then I'll take over here. It works great with 2 people because she can feed bottles and take the full ones while I keep filling them. It makes for less mess. When I used to do this all by myself, I'd hold a bottle like between my legs and start the siphon with one hand and things like that.
He would normally end up with a bit of the brew in his lap.
Yeah, I wore some of it. Not a lot, but some. We do get a lot of people asking, can I just pour it? Or can I use filters like coffee filters and things like that? There are specific wine filters. I'm not even going to get into those. To me, I don't think it's necessary to filter it. As far as pouring it or using coffee filters, a siphon is the easiest way. If you don't have an auto siphon, hold on. I had to switch bottles here because that one's full. If you don't have an auto siphon, you can just use the tubing, which is really, really cheap. But an auto siphon is less than $20 in most areas. And Amazon has them. We have the link right in the description of this video on how to get one. They're really inexpensive. You'll have it for years. If you cannot possibly get it, just use plastic or silicone tubing. Anything food grade is good enough. And, just fill it with liquid, like dunk it in there, both ends. Make sure your hands are sanitized. And put one end in the bottle, the other one in there, and when you open that up, it'll siphon. It's just a siphon.
Basically, like most things, you can make this as complicated or as easy as you choose to do.
And as messy as you want.
We try to keep it as simple and cost-effective as possible, yet still prioritizing safety.
If you do decide to do the tube method, the one part of that I would recommend not doing is putting your mouth on one end to start the siphon, because you went through all this effort to keep it infection-free all this time. Adding bacteria from your mouth directly to the brew at the end for bottling, probably not the smartest thing to do. So I would probably avoid doing that. Pouring it, this is 12%. It has a chance of becoming vinegar because 15% is the actual cutoff for vinegar, but it's not as likely. I mean, if you really have no option and you can pour really, really carefully without splashing, it's almost acceptable to do it, but it's still not good. It's not a good idea because you can still oxidize and get off flavors. It's just not the best way to go. Don't even get me started on coffee filters. Bad idea.
We have a video on that.
We actually have a video on that. Yeah. And it's still, don't do it. You will oxidize the heck out of your brew and it takes forever. Remember what I said before about eating my words about a half bottle? I'm fairly certain, though, that when people measure bottles, 1 liter's like here.
Yeah.
It's got to be. Because, this is a 1 gallon jar. But you would think the gallon would be all the way up here. But it's actually not. It's, down here. And with our smaller ones, the ones that the free apple juice comes in, they're actually 1.2 gallons all the way up in the neck. So, marketing. Just call it a 0.9 liter bottle. I don't care, but it's just, that's annoying. Or a 1.1 liter bottle, because it'd be the other way. Yeah. So anyway, this is now going to be our taster, which means this one will just sit on the shelf for a couple of days. The amount of headroom is not a great way for storage, okay? That's why we're going to drink this one sooner rather than later. These other 3 are perfectly fine. See how high up it is there. Now,
so what that means is that these can be stored in a relatively level temperature, dark environment.
Room temperature.
And
or chilled.
They'll be fine. This guy is going in the fridge.
Mm-hmm. Well, once we drink some of it
yes.
in the tasting, because we do our tastings at room temperature now.
Yes.
But one of these will actually get put away for a whole year.
Let's find out just how good our dry mead turned out.
And we bottled this when it was 27 days old. And I know that because we just finished filming the bottling of it like 20 minutes ago, so I still remember. And it ended at 0.999 specific gravity, so it's very dry, and it has about a 12.5% ABV. So let me just do a little pour here.
But we know what you want. You want the pour can.
All right, so we got our samples. First, color. It has a pretty color, but it's cloudy.
It's cloudy.
And it's not that cloudy like soup. It's not pea soup. I mean, you can totally see light through it. It's just got a little bit of a haze, is what I would call it.
Yeah, it's uniform too, so it almost looks like you're looking at it through a frosted glass rather than a murky beverage, if that makes any sense.
Now, there's many reasons why it could have a haze to it, and one of them is it's only 27 days old. Most of our meads, we let them go much longer before we bottle. It'll probably clear in the bottle over time, and that'll mean a little bit of sediment at the bottom of the bottles. That's part of why we usually let them sit a lot longer.
Yeah.
And that way, we don't have that in the bottom of the bottle, and we have a clear product in the bottle.
As far as a little bit of lees settling out into your bottles, it really isn't that big of a deal.
It's going to happen
particularly
anyway.
If you know what it is, you shouldn't be freaked out about it. And the way to deal with that is just pour gently.
Yeah, pour really carefully. Bottles are actually designed for that on purpose, so that as it gets to about there, any liquid past that, very carefully, won't have the lees. The neck actually will catch
it'll trap
the
it
lees.
down here.
So bottles are designed for that purpose. But as far as clarity goes, in all honesty, it doesn't matter, okay? As long as it's not like drinking chunky soup or pea soup, it's not a problem.
Of course, it's left up to your personal preference.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things we could have done. We could have cold crashed this. Putting it in a refrigerator condenses the particle movement and facilitates a quicker...
Yeah, it can help it clear. But a lot of people get freaked out over non-clear brews, and it doesn't make them inferior.
Nope.
It just makes it where fermentation happened a little bit differently.
Yeah.
We don't normally see that with our brews. Usually they do come out pretty clear, but I'm not that offended when they don't come out clear. Okay. In the 1 year tasting, this will probably be crystal clear then. Yeah. So it's all good.
We'll find out in a year.
Anyway, on the aroma, normally a very young mead will have what we call the footnote.
This one does not. It has a smidgen.
I mean, a tiny bit.
At the end, like once you've inhaled.
Which to me smells like grapefruit. I've said that before.
Yeah,
I haven't said it in a while. The footnote to me almost smells like grapefruit. And I get just a hint of it in this. Not very much at all. I definitely smell the honey.
Yeah.
That totally comes through, which is unusual at this age. Quite possibly this is drinking this way too young. Just so you know, this is like unheard of young to drink a dry mead. But yeah, on the aroma, I totally get a little bit, I get kind of a flowery, definitely floral. The honey is there. The characteristic is there. This is Bev's honey. So I know this is like wildflowers and things like that, Florida stuff.
Yeah.
And I know it's pretty much all natural. So she doesn't control what they eat so much. But they're well taken care of bees. I know that.
And it was really good honey. If you saw the making of this video, it was really good honey.
Yeah, normally something this young, I don't like smelling it this long. This is actually quite pleasant.
Quite pleasant, yeah.
I'm ready for a short sip. Are you ready for a short sip?
I'm ready for a short sip.
Now, the intention of the short sip is to just literally take a short sip, get some in your mouth, and swallow it down as quickly as possible. It's just to acclimate you to the flavors and alcohol level, which this isn't super high, but it's still enough that you need to acclimate to it. My first sip, I definitely got that little bit of a floral hit and the honey right up front. Slight bitterness, which I attribute to the footnote and being that it's fermented honey, just a little bit at the back end.
Which is interesting because I actually got citrus.
Oh. Okay, well, there was citrus peel in this, so I'm not surprised that you got some citrus. People have commented that we normally get different things and we can almost convince each other that it's there. That's normal. That's the way it should work.
Yes.
If everybody tasted exactly the same thing and everything, it would be a very boring world because your brains, your experiences are totally different from the person sitting next to you or across the world from you. So what your brain tells you taste is different than what their brain tells them they taste.
If you enjoy whiskey, you will find this in
Oh, yeah.
analyzing the flavors that you're getting from different whiskeys.
You will taste things that were never there.
What is actually occurring is your brain is trying to find memories that it pairs with what
Right.
you're experiencing in that beverage. So it doesn't necessarily mean those memories, the items that are in those memories are in this beverage. It's just the closest comparison your
Right.
brain can come up with. So Brian has consumed things that I have not, and vice versa. So
Right.
therefore, our memories are different, and we're going to connect them differently.
But that explains why everything tastes like chicken. It's your brain putting it to something that it can associate with to make it okay.
So if a person has never eaten chicken,
Then it wouldn't taste like chicken.
Then
It would taste like whatever the chicken substitute they have eaten their whole life tastes like.
alrighty. I think we've gone a little too far off the end there with our
It's
tasting
okay
notes.
though. It's okay. They're good. They like this.
Okay.
So now it's time for the long sip.
sip.
Now in the long sip, you just put it in your mouth and you leave it there for a few seconds. Let it flow over your tongue, over all of your mouth, and that gives you a real indication of what the beverage tastes like. Wow. I would swear this was sweeter. Like, this does not taste like 0.999 to me.
Nope. It doesn't taste,
It's dry, but it doesn't taste that dry.
but it doesn't taste that ABV either.
No, it certainly doesn't.
It's very clean
Mm-hmm.
and
It's refreshing.
and refreshing.
Crisp.
I can see this. I'm just going to jump into pairing and without saying my tasting notes because that's where my brain's going. But I think this would be awesome with food because
Oh, yeah. Treat it like a white wine. Basically,
Yes.
anything that you would drink white wine with, you can drink this with.
and it would work as a palate cleanser in between courses.
Mhm.
It's
But the finish is
very
actually
light.
kind of long. It's much
Yeah,
longer
yeah,
than
yeah.
I would think.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a honey and a bitter note that's not unpleasant. I actually really like it as my finish that just kind of stays there. On the exhale, that's kind of what I'm getting is a honey character with a little bit of a bitter note. So it balances it out. Really, really interesting.
something that I found incredibly interesting, and this was an experience that Brian and I both shared during our finishing video for the dry mead, was that it was still definitely honey, just without the sweetness.
Yeah.
And I never anticipated that you would get a honey note without sweetness.
Right. We've made dry mead before that was unpalatable. We didn't actually like it at all until
Right.
it was like a year old.
Now, it could be simply because of the quality of honey we used in this dry wine
I think that's a big part of it.
that kept those honey notes
Mhm.
while we fermented out the sugars from the honey. But it's really nice. It's very pleasant. It's not overly complicated,
No.
but it has those honey notes with a real clean, crisp
Well, this was meant to be a very
experience.
simple mead.
Yeah.
And something that a first timer could make that would be enjoyable still, because there's a lot of beginner and first timer stuff out there that really isn't all that great. So I wanted to make something really easy that you could literally make with stuff that you buy at the grocery store and is ready to drink in a month. And this actually is. This works really, really well. And I'm really happy with it. As far as cooking with it, though, I mean, this pairs, like I said, with anything that you would drink white wine with. We're just going to leave it at that because
Sure.
the list is endless.
Yeah.
Would I cook with this? Absolutely. Again, anytime you'd add white wine to glazing pans and sauces and gravies, whatever you want to do as a marinade, this would be wonderful. It's going to work really, really well. Would I pour this in a glass and drink it? Yeah. Definitely. This is definitely a drinker. This is something that you would want to sip over time. Works really, really well. It's numbers time.
Now, this is going to be particularly hard for me, number-wise, because it's really good, yet it's really simple. And I am a huge fan of layers. Anything that has
Right.
layers makes me happy. And so because
Well,
this is... it's not a one note. Don't get
No,
me
it's
that
definitely
wrong.
not. I do get the citrus now, by the way. I didn't at first, but now I do.
It's a few notes, like 4 notes.
The way I'm judging this for a number is this is intended to be a simple, dry mead. Taken from that perspective, just a simple, dry mead, how good is it with 1 being probably toxic and don't give it to anybody, 5 being, yeah, I would drink that. Probably not the first thing I'd reach for, but I would totally drink it. And 10 being in its form for what it was made for, can it be improved?
Well, that's going to be difficult for me to answer because we are relatively new into the realm of purposely creating dry beverages.
Yeah, we normally make them sweeter. And we thought about sweetening this, but it's meant to be dry. So
right.
That's why we left it.
And we're enjoying it in its dry form. We purposely set out to make a dry mead, and we haven't done that in the past. So how do I compare this? How do I improve this? How do I analyze this? And I don't really have an answer for that. Now, based on what Brian was suggesting on how to judge it, I actually have a much higher number than what I would normally do based on just my enjoyment of the beverage, if that makes sense. Because I am still more partial to sweeter and fruitier things, where this is more light and citrusy. It tastes
more like a hydromel to me.
Yes, it does. And that could be dangerous because the ABV says this is not a hydromel. And enjoying a nice dinner, particularly if it has multiple courses and you're taking your time and you're sipping this throughout the meal and you had a little before and you have some more after, bad things could happen.
The more I taste it, though, the more honey character and floral I get. And that hit of citrus, the orange comes through.
It's lovely.
It's really nice.
Lovely.
This is really good.
And now that we're talking about it more and I'm thinking about it more, I'm actually pushing my score up just mentally because...
So should we just keep talking and the score goes way up?
Well, I already had a set number based on your criteria.
Okay.
So based on your criteria, that's the number I'm going to give.
Okay. I think I'm ready. I have a number.
All right.
I'm debating between 2 still, but I think I'm just going to throw it out there and just deal with the consequences. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3,
9.
Ooh, I was debating between 8.5 and 9. And I went with 9 simply because I don't think that this can get much better than it is. I think a little bit more citrus peel might have improved the flavor ever so slightly, taken away just a touch of that bitter note. It's not horrible, but it is noticeable. So I'd like to see a little bit of that lessened. That's about it. And I'd like it to clear.
That said, we have tried fermenting citrus before with minimal...
Yeah, but we've had great luck with zest.
True.
Great luck with zest.
True.
Now, something I want to note too. This has nothing to do with my score. I mean, the scores speak for themselves. We pretty much said everything about them. This is a wonderful foundation to flavor from. And that's one great thing about making a simple mead like this. We can add dried fruit to it. You can add fresh fruit to it. You can add juice to it. Just remember, it might re-ferment if you do, except that our yeast tolerance is... We're pretty close to the yeast tolerance on this one.
I just came out with an excellent idea.
Uh-oh.
You could use this as a base for a white sangria.
You certainly can. Yep. Just add a bunch of fruit into a bowl and pour some of this in and you have a white sangria.
You could have the citrus. You could have melon. You could white grape.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could go with that. That actually sounds really nice.
Yeah.
And the advantage to doing it that way is you're getting all the fruity flavors without worrying about re-fermentation. Okay, so that's... not even something you'd have to consider. But overall, very impressed with this mead. And this is probably going to replace my first mead as my go-to mead in the house because it's not as sweet. So for me, it's a better thing for me to be drinking. I could totally see putting this on an ice ball and treating it like I would, not a whiskey necessarily, but that thing. I think it would be better chilled than it is warm. This is warm, by the way. This is room temperature.
An interesting note is whenever Brian cooks something really wonderful, which is pretty much every day.
Twice a day.
I always am drawn to pair it with a wine. Yeah,
she always goes
into the room.
And
for some reason, my brain doesn't include mead in there unless it's a really fruit forward mead, which is just a hang up of my own. But I think this particular mead is changing my mind.
This is the mead to drink with food, without a doubt.
Yeah. So now I'm going to be looking for this when Brian cooks.
So we're probably going to make like a 3-gallon batch of it now. Hey, Bev, need more honey. No, actually, we still have 2 more things. I'm just kidding.
So, in summary, this is awesome. Make it. It's simple, it's easy, and it goes great with food.
It's been about a year since we made that dry traditional mead. So let's see, how's it doing?
So first off, it is beautiful.
Second, it's 12.5% ABV. Not too bad. This finished dry. I didn't specify, but yeah, it doesn't. I didn't write it on there because, you know, it's dry. It's 1.000 or below, most likely. But this is just a basic traditional meant to be dry.
It has a lovely aroma.
Wow. Yeah.
It's like
very honey forward.
Honey, but almost like a fruity floral combo honey, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It smells a little sweet.
It does.
A little floral, a little fruity. Oh wow, this is
fruity floral.
Yeah, so far I'm pretty happy about this.
Yeah.
Let's see if the taste actually lives up to that though.
Yeah.
Ooh. Ooh. This is good. This is quite good.
Now for our tasting, I did a major faux pas, and that is I was drinking another beverage before this beverage. Oh, I was cheating on the dry mead. And I didn't take a nice good swallow of water, or I didn't eat any crackers or anything else.
I too was drinking something else, but mine was dry. Hers was sweet.
So I think that may have tainted the situation. So let's remedy that, shall we? Brian's giant Yeti.
It's only 46 ounces. I don't think I need I don't want to. I'm enjoying this.
All right, so let's try that again. I still have to smell it because I'm Derica.
The bouquet on this is incredible.
It's really lovely. So I'm getting a lot more of a white wine type scenario for me. And up front, I'm not getting sweetness. I'm getting that almost cleansing that you get from white wines.
Okay.
And coming straight off the aroma, it's a little, I'm taken a little aback. And then from there, it kind of evens out. And so that change for me is coming off almost watery, which is unusual. And then on the end, and I can tell by Brian's expression that he's getting a completely different experience, and that is completely okay and actually normal. And then at the end, I'm getting more notes, but they're more green, not green like youth, but green like
earthy,
grassy, vegetal. Yeah.
Okay. I see everything that you're talking about to a point. However, for me, on the entrance, I get the hint of honey. It doesn't taste as much of honey as it smells of honey. It smells very strongly of honey. On the intake, I get a hint of honey, a slight sweetness, and almost like a creamy smoothness. Not creamy, not the diacetyl, just a smoothness that it coats my mouth.
Yeah, I think it's that, I used to call it soft.
Yeah,
that soft
it
sensation.
definitely has that. It does not have a strong tannic component and a very mild acidic component. So that's where the wateriness you're talking about. I do detect the wateriness. It could be a little bit more tannic, but not. It's not like a bad thing. I mean, if you were to look at a triangle, the triangle's just aimed to one side a little bit. Because this doesn't have a lot of sweetness, it doesn't have a lot of acid, it doesn't have a lot of tannins. So that's where she's going. But also, it's not super high gravity or ABV to have a lot of punch behind it. I think I need more though for science. I rather like it though. I think the white wine analogy is perfect. And a good traditional dry mead is a lot like a white wine. I mean, they just are. Once you ferment everything out and the sweetness goes away, what's left is the essence of the alcohol and the essence of the honey or grape if it was white wine. And yeah, that's what we're left with. I do get the floral thing though through the middle, and on the finish, I get just a touch of astringency, that little bit of a bitterness from the honey in the back of my throat. I think this is actually quite nice though.
I think I would enjoy this more paired with food than I would drinking it alone. And now that I'm drinking it more, I'm probably becoming more acclimated to it, and the strawberry is going away. And I am getting a little bit of touch of honey sweetness at the very beginning now, the more I'm drinking it.
Yeah, the more I'm drinking of it, which I say this a lot, the more I drink of it, the more I appreciate it. But it's not the alcohol talking. We're having like 2 ounces here. That's not it at all. It's more, I think the unpleasant things tend to fade into the distance and you start to pick out things that you're looking for. Like I'm looking for the honey, so I'm finding it. And I'm not looking for, harsh flavors or anything like that. There are none. This is very smooth, very rounded. It's slightly out of balance. That's as much negative as I can really give it. It's slightly out of balance. If it was slightly more acidic, slightly tannic, like if this was oaked, I think this would be phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
I think it would absolutely be phenomenal.
And I know we say that a lot, but oaking really does bring many of the beverages that just have a slight bit of discordancy, even though this one really isn't that discordant, but it just has like a little note that's like off. It just really rounds everything out and brings everything together and adds those little bit of
also covers up our mistakes
and stuff.
Just be honest.
Really nice. And because this seems like a really good base, and I keep comparing it to white wine, and in my brain, white wine is a base for cooking. Sorry, white wine enthusiasts.
Well, it is a base. If you think about it, any basic cider, any basic wine, any basic mead, they're a base. They're a foundation to build on. So you could take this recipe and change it, add your flavors, add fruit, add other sugars, add other things to it and get a completely different brew.
Right.
But this is the basis for it. And that's kind of the way we like to do things, is give you guys, here's a basic idea, and then you can expand on it. And, people are always asking, well, can I make it with this fruit instead of that fruit? Of course you can. It'll just be a different thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different thing. Now, some fruits, though they will work, may not work the same way. So you have to be a little bit careful, and it's good to ask those questions, because if you didn't ask and it's the one fruit that could be a problem and you do it, then we look bad for telling you, oh yeah, you can totally do it, Instead, most times, like somebody says, oh, can I substitute strawberries for blueberries? Of course you can. There's no problem there. They're almost the same thing. Now, can I substitute lemons for blueberries? While you can, doesn't mean you should, because they will change the pH, they will change the astringency, the acid levels, everything, and could, depending on the recipe, mess it up completely, make it stall, or make it taste ick. And there's a lot of ways that can go. It could also make it amazing, depending on what you're doing with it. So everything is a yes with a caveat. Just remember that. Sorry, that was my rant for the day.
I think my mind also, because I'm going towards the wines, and for me, wine is something you drink with food.
Yeah.
That's my go-to when Brian creates something amazing for us to eat. I get all excited. I'm like, oh, what can I pair this with?
Yep, she puts it with a glass of wine.
And so I'm urged to pair this with food because it reminds me so much of a white wine.
Now, there's a good reason for pairing wine, especially wine, with food. It's because you have water-soluble flavors, fat-soluble flavors, and alcohol-soluble flavors. Coincidentally, tomatoes actually have an alcohol-soluble flavor that if you do not add alcohol to your tomato sauce, doesn't come out. And if you put them in the fridge, it locks up some of the flavors and they cannot be unlocked. Fun fact.
So if you're not drinking a nice glass of wine with your tomato-based food, you're missing something. You're welcome.
I actually enjoy this. I would not say this is my favorite we've ever made. I would not put this as like the ultimate best example of a dry traditional mead, but I would say this is a quite good dry traditional mead. It's very hard to make a dry, basic mead taste really good.
Yes.
Because there's just not a lot there to support it. And any flaws are going to show. And we're seeing the flaw that it could use a little more tannic backbone. It could use a little bit more mouthfeel. That's really my complaint. I think the acidity is right.
Yeah.
Even the sweetness level, I don't mind it. Obviously, make it sweeter. It's going to taste better. That's just the way things
And then
are.
it won't be a dry mead anymore.
Right. So to me, a little bit of a tannic aspect would alter this and make it really, really amazingly good. As it stands, though, I get the honey character coming through. Definitely taste the honey. I think we used an orange blossom honey for this.
I'm just thinking, comparing this
Taste it.
to my memories of dry mead. My memories of dry mead were samples at the Ren Fair, and those.
Oh, this is way better than that.
Yes. That's a nice way of saying it.
The stuff that we got at the Ren Fair, at our Ren Fair. Now, everybody's Ren Fair is different, and I know some people tell me that, oh, that's where I got the best meat ever. And you know what? I wish I was you.
I know.
I wish we lived closer to you, because we would totally go with you
I think
and
somebody
drink that
said
awesome mead.
There was one in Wisconsin that had awesome mead, and I'm like,
Of course, Wisconsin happens to be like the opposite side of the
Yeah.
country for us. So
Like,
it's a little
how-
inconvenient for us to just take a drive and go to the Ren
how
Fair.
much would plane tickets?
Someday, we'll think about it. Our Ren Fair mead, if I was to put a score on it, is somewhere between a 2 and a 3. I wouldn't dump it, but I definitely wouldn't choose it to drink. I might mix it with something that was good, or, just, I don't know, add a shot of it to like a whole glass of something else.
But we're getting more of a Viking influence into our local Ren Fair, so we're hoping that with them
Yeah.
comes better meat.
Whereas this is significantly higher than a 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know the brand of the mead that they have. I know they had Bunratty.
Was that this one or the other?
That was this one.
Okay.
The last time we went.
But was,
Oh, no, it was the one in
that
Sarasota.
was- yeah.
Anyway, both of them suck. They both have crappy mead.
Okay. Just
What?
bring it down a notch, Brian.
That is brought down a notch. Think of all the things I could be saying.
So, in regards to that line of thought, it's time for numbers. Are you ready?
Yeah, I have a number.
All right.
1, 2, 3, 7.5. Wow, great disparity there. It's interesting.
So I'm low man, and I am not surprised at all because
It's not a Derek
this
thing.
isn't my thing. I'm a sweet girl. At least I like to think I am.
I think you're very sweet.
So pretty much anything dry normally just kind of like, okay. But that being said, I didn't give it below 5 because I am getting increasingly hungrier by the moment the drinking this. And I know I'm not actually hungry because we just had lunch.
She's thinking about food.
But I'm thinking about food. This is making me thinking about food. This is making me thinking about what specific types of food I want to pair it with. And now I want those foods to be created so that I can drink more of this. So would that make it less
So
than a
what
5?
am I cooking for you for dinner tonight?
No, that would not make it less than a 5.
So what are you having me make now?
I don't know, because we're playing D&D and I have to make things.
Okay.
Anyway,
So that was why you gave it 5. I went 7.5 for a couple of reasons. One, I am trying to train myself to appreciate drier brews on purpose because I am diabetic. I don't like to bring that over to this channel much because it's a kind of a conflict, but it's true. And I am trying to train into appreciating drier brews. I do appreciate this. If it was sweeter, would I like it more? Absolutely. But that doesn't make it something I should be doing. So in my mind, as an example of a dry product, would I drink this? Well, yeah, I probably will finish this bottle in the next few days because it's that kind of good. I appreciate it that much and I know it won't affect me negatively. Now, if you aren't diabetic and don't have any other illness that would cause you to have to drink dry, you may appreciate this anyway because it does have some of the fruity flavors coming through, some of the honey flavors coming through, and it's good in general. So as a product standing alone, I found it to be very good. As a product for me, given my exact situation, which everybody's situation is different, I found it to be very good. Now, 7.5 is not a 10, but it's not a 5, and it's not a 0. So it's good. It's not the best it can be. There's still room for improvement.
That said, if it tasted the way it smelled,
It'd be a 12.
it would be a 2000.
It smells so much better than it tastes. And that is that's a phenomenon that happens quite often. I think if this was to sit, I don't think we have any more of these. I think I drank them all already. If this was to sit for 2, maybe even 3 years, it might actually get to those kind of numbers.
Sure.
Because I believe everything that's evolving within it needs to completely do its thing before it catches up to the smell.
And that's another thing that I'm going to talk about, is that as you're aging a fermented beverage, there are chemical changes occurring inside that bottle that you have no control over. They're going to happen. It's just what occurs.
More stuff falls out of.
And so that's why you will notice that aged wines particularly tend to be more pricey, because that span of time has created a new elevated product.
Mm-hmm.
So aging your brews can, in most instances, not always, make a more refined, interesting beverage. It tends to round out some notes. It tends to blend things together. It tends to make a more well-rounded finished product, where non-aged brews tend to have disparate little sharp pockets of notes.
And the thing to remember with aging is that compounds are always being created and destroyed, okay? But the original is still there. So what I mean by that is the original ingredients are all still there. They just get put together differently. And that's where we say rounded, smoother, things like that. Because as it goes, say it's a long chain, and then that chain breaks in half, and then that chain breaks in half, and then in half, and then they start recombining. Over time,
But all the parts of the chain are
all
still
those
there.
parts are still there,
They're just
but now it's
connected
more
differently.
mixed together and more blended. That's pretty much what aging does. Easiest way to explain it. You'll also see sediment in aged brews. There's no avoiding it. It happens with commercial products as well. The reason you don't see it as much in commercial products is a lot of times they actually filter them too. If it's filtered, you won't see as much. Plus also, how many times do you buy a commercial product, leave it sitting for 3 years before you drink it? Now, if you do, you probably will see a little bit of sediment in the bottom. In homebrew, more because, well, it's not always sat for a year before you bottled it. You know, you might have rushed it like we do because you have to put a video out and show people. Or you just, for whatever reason, it wasn't fully settled, it wasn't fully cleared. There's a million reasons, and you're going to get a little bit more. It's homebrew. Embrace the differences between homebrew and commercial products. Don't look at it as inferior or superior. It's just different. It's a different product. You get to make this small scale thing that your average commercial brewer can't do. And they can't do it because of legal reasons, insurance reasons, logistics reasons. There's so many things. Don't see it as better or worse. It's just different and it's your own. And that's the cool part about brewing for yourself.
So that is it for our 1-year review of our dry mead.
As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.